The house had finally become everything Clara Bennett had dreamed of. After months of sanding walls, choosing paint swatches under the harsh kitchen light, comparing endless shades of cream and blue, and agonizing over every single piece of furniture, the place finally felt like home. Their home. Clara had poured herself into it, not just financially, but emotionally, weaving her hopes into every corner, every shelf, every framed photograph that she chose with such care. To her, the house wasn't just a building, it was a symbol of renewal, of finally moving beyond the struggles of the last few years, of putting down roots and creating something steady. She thought of it as the beginning of a new chapter, not just in her life, but in her marriage with Ethan. That's why, when Ethan casually dropped the words over dinner, the entire illusion cracked. "So, Mark's going to stay with us for a while," he said, stabbing a piece of roasted chicken with his fork. He spoke as if it were the most ordinary thing in the world. "Just until he gets back on his feet." Clara froze, her fork hovering above her plate. For a second, she wasn't sure she'd heard correctly. "Mark?" she asked, her voice tentative. "As in your friend Mark Turner? The one going through the divorce?" "Yeah," Ethan replied, chewing with no sense of urgency. "He needs a place to crash. And he's bringing Rusty too." "Rusty?" she repeated, her appetite evaporating. "The dog," Ethan said, still unconcerned. Clara slowly set her fork down, her heart tightening in her chest. "And how long is a while supposed to be?" Ethan shrugged, leaning back in his chair. "Until further notice. You know, just until he figures things out." Clara pressed her palms into her lap, trying to keep her composure. She was 36, not a child, and she refused to let her voice shake. "Ethan," she said carefully, "don't you think we should have talked about this first? This is a big decision. We've just finished moving in. We're still finding our rhythm here, and—" "It's my house too," Ethan interrupted, his tone sharp enough to sting. "I don't need your permission to help my best friend." Her stomach knotted at the words. He said it so casually, as though her input was trivial. "This isn't just about Mark," Clara pushed, heat rising in her voice despite her efforts to remain calm. "We've finally settled down here. And now you want someone else living with us? With a dog? Ethan, this affects both of us." He exhaled loudly, leaning back with his fork clattering against the plate. "You're making this into a bigger deal than it is. Mark's going through hell right now. His wife threw him out. He doesn't have anywhere to go, and I'm not about to leave him hanging. You'd do the same if it were one of your friends." "That's not the point," Clara snapped, sharper than she intended. She took a deep breath, steadying herself. "The point is you didn't ask me. You just decided. And now I'm supposed to roll with it like I don't get a choice." "It's my house too," Ethan repeated, his tone hardening. "And my decision is final." The words slammed into Clara like a blow. Final. Not our decision. Not we'll figure it out. His decision. She stared at him across the table, her pulse racing. Every fiber of her wanted to yell, to throw her glass across the room, to tell him how cruel it felt to be dismissed in her own home. But instead, she forced her voice into something calm and cold. "Okay," she said simply. Ethan frowned, clearly expecting more of a fight. That's it. She stood, clearing her plate without another word. The sound of the dishwasher opening was louder than she intended, but she didn't care. Ethan turned on the television in the living room, acting like the conversation was over. But in Clara's mind, it had only just begun. As she loaded dishes, her hands shook, but not from weakness, from anger. For years, she had let Ethan's decisions slide. He had a pattern, quitting jobs suddenly, booking vacations without asking her schedule, making promises that involved her but never consulting her. Each time, he brushed her off with the same careless words. "It's fine. We'll figure it out." And each time, Clara convinced herself it wasn't worth a fight. But this time was different. This house wasn't just another rental or another temporary stop. This was their fresh start. She had spent nights picking out curtains, sanding old furniture, imagining dinners at the new oak table. And now he wanted to bring someone else into it without even giving her a say? That night, Ethan slept soundly beside her, his even breaths infuriatingly steady. Clara lay wide awake, staring at the ceiling. The walls felt different now, colder, less like hers. She realized with a sharp clarity that if she didn't draw a line, she might never get her voice back. A plan began to form. It wasn't loud or dramatic. She wasn't going to scream or throw ultimatums at him in the heat of the moment.
No.
She was going to show Ethan what it felt like when decisions were made, without his consent. The following day, after Ethan left for work, Clara called a locksmith. She explained she wanted all the exterior locks changed. Just for safety, she told the man with a forced smile. He didn't need to know that it wasn't burglars she was protecting herself from. When he handed her the new set of keys, Clara felt a flicker of power, small but undeniable. Her next step was reclaiming the inside of the house. She walked from room to room, pausing at each piece that screamed Ethan's influence. The oversized recliner that dominated the living room. The dark, clunky coffee table his mother had insisted they take. The framed sports jerseys on the wall that made their stylish home look like a man cave. Clara rolled up her sleeves and began moving everything into the garage. By evening, the house looked different. Lighter. Hers. Sophie came over that night, a bottle of wine in hand. Sophie had been Clara's best friend since college, the one person who never sugarcoated things. She raised her eyebrows as she stepped inside.
Wow.
This place looks decluttered. Don't tell me Ethan agreed to this. Clara laughed bitterly, pouring them both glasses of wine. Not exactly. He thinks his word is law. So I'm showing him what happens when I make decisions on my own. Sophie settled onto the couch, tucking her legs under her. I love this for you. But seriously, what's your endgame? He's going to show up with Mark and the mutt any day now.
What happens then?
Clara swirled her wine, savoring the moment. Then he'll learn. If Mark, stays here, it'll be under my conditions. Not Ethan's. And if Ethan can't respect that, then maybe he should be the one packing his bags. Sophie grinned, raising her glass. Cheers to finally growing a backbone. Cheers, Clara echoed, clinking her glass. But beneath her calm exterior, her mind raced with anticipation. She prepared the guest room with clinical precision. One mattress, a thin blanket, a single pillow. No flowers, no extra touches, nothing that said welcome. The dog had no designated space. If Ethan wanted to play host, he'd have to do it without her help. Lastly, Clara packed a small overnight bag of Ethan's essentials, just enough for him to notice. She left it by the front door, not as a threat, but as a reminder. And then came the letter. Clara spent hours drafting it, her words measured, firm, impossible to twist. Ethan, it read. This house is our shared home, which means decisions about it should be made together. By inviting Mark to live here without asking me, you dismissed my feelings and undermined our partnership. I won't tolerate being treated like an afterthought. If Mark stays, it will be under my conditions, not yours. And if you can't respect that, you're free to leave. She sealed the letter in an envelope and taped it to the front door. Every time she walked past it in the days that followed, Clara felt a surge of courage. Ethan didn't suspect anything. Why would he? He still believed she would bend like she always had. He mentioned Mark casually, expecting her to play the supportive wife. Clara simply smiled and gave polite answers, hiding the storm brewing inside her. The day of reckoning arrived sooner than she expected. Ethan texted her in the morning. We'll be there at 6. Make sure everything's ready for Mark. The words burned, as though she were his assistant, not his partner. By late afternoon, the house was spotless, the guest room perfectly mediocre, the envelope taped firmly to the door. Clara's pulse quickened as the clock neared 6. For years she had avoided confrontation. But tonight she was ready. When the sound of a car pulling into the driveway echoed through the windows, Clara's breath caught in her throat. She stood in the kitchen, just out of sight, straining to hear. The front door opened. Silence. Then Ethan's voice, sharp and incredulous. What the hell is this? Looks like a letter. Mark's voice answered, quieter, uncertain. Maybe you should read it. Clara's heart pounded as silence stretched. Then Ethan's roar shook the air. What the hell is this supposed to mean? The front door slammed. Clara pressed her hands against the counter, steadying herself. He had read it. Now came the storm. The silence stretched across the house like a thick fog. Clara waited, barely breathing, as the distant sounds of Mark and Ethan echoed down the hallway. She could picture them standing in the entryway, the weight of the letter sinking in. Ethan's voice was rising, sharp and incredulous. Clara knew the exact moment the reality hit him. He had underestimated her. What the hell is this supposed to mean? Ethan's voice thundered, and Clara's grip tightened on the countertop. She forced herself to remain calm. Her stomach knotted, but she didn't move, didn't speak. She let him process it. Let him stew in the words. Clara could hear the rustling of paper, the unmistakable sound of the letter being shaken at Mark. She knew what he was doing, demanding answers, shaking his head in confusion, growing angrier with each passing second. Mark's voice followed, softer, more tentative. Maybe you should read it, he suggested. Clara's breath caught. Mark was trying to ease the tension, but she could hear the awkwardness in his words. This wasn't his fight, but he was trapped in the middle of it. The dog, Rusty, barked twice from outside, adding to the cacophony. Ethan muttered under his breath, something unintelligible, and then the loud crash of the front door slamming shut made her flinch. The silence that followed was almost more deafening than the anger. Clara stepped away from the kitchen counter, walking slowly, deliberately toward the living room. She wasn't angry anymore. Not at Ethan, not at Mark. This wasn't about rage. This was about taking back control. She rounded the corner to find Ethan standing in the foyer, his face contorted with a mixture of confusion and fury. Mark was standing off to the side, shifting uncomfortably, as though he might just disappear into the floor if he could. Clara stood in the doorway, arms crossed, her stance unyielding. Her eyes met Ethan's, and for the first time in years, she didn't feel the need to look away. "Oh, hi," she said, as casually as if she were greeting a neighbor. Ethan froze for a moment, as though he couldn't believe she had the audacity to speak first. His eyes flicked from Clara to the crumpled letter in his hand, then back to her. "What is this?" he demanded, shaking the paper at her. The confusion in his eyes was quickly being replaced by frustration. "What the hell are you trying to pull?" Clara didn't flinch. She was done with shrinking in the face of his anger. "I'm not trying to pull anything, Ethan," she said, her voice steady, measured. "I'm just reminding you that this is our home. And I'm not going to stand by while you treat me like a guest in my own space." Mark shifted uncomfortably, stepping back slightly. "Hey, if this is a bad time," he began, voice uncertain. "I can leave. I don't want to cause problems between you two." Clara turned toward him, her tone softening. "No, Mark," she said gently. "This isn't your fault. You're just caught in the middle of something Ethan should have handled differently." Ethan turned on her then, his face reddening with anger. "Handled differently? Are you serious? You're making a mountain out of a molehill. It's just Mark staying here for a while. What's the big deal?" His voice was rising with each word, but Clara didn't back down. "I'm making a point," she said firmly, meeting his gaze head-on. "For years, you've made decisions that affect both of us without asking me. This house was supposed to be our fresh start, Ethan. But instead, you've turned it into a dumping ground for everyone else's problems." He sneered at her, crossing his arms. "I don't see the problem. He's my best friend. He's been through hell. He needs a place to stay. Why is that such a huge deal?" Clara didn't flinch, her voice now cold as ice. "It's not just about Mark. It's about how you treat me. You didn't even ask. You just decided. And now I'm supposed to accept it without question? Like I don't have a say in my own home." Mark's eyes darted between them, clearly uncomfortable. "I don't want to get involved in this, but, if you two need to talk." "No," Ethan snapped, cutting him off. "You're not leaving. You've made this worse, Clara. This is my house too. And I'm not going to let you make the rules around here." Clara turned on him, finally stepping forward. "It's not just your house, Ethan. It's mine too," she said, her voice low and steady. And unless you're willing to treat me like an equal partner, then maybe you should be the one leaving. The words hung in the air, and for a brief moment, Ethan froze. His chest heaved with frustration, but there was something else, something Clara had never seen before. A flicker of uncertainty. "Seriously?" he asked, his voice dropping to a near whisper. Clara nodded, her jaw set. "I've had enough of being ignored, of being treated like I don't matter. If you want this marriage to work, you need to start listening. If not, I'll be fine on my own." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Ethan's anger was still there, but now it was laced with something else. Regret? Realization? Clara couldn't be sure. Mark cleared his throat, his eyes flicking to the door. "I think maybe it's best if I leave," he said, his voice tense.
Clara sighed.
"You're not the problem, Mark. You're just caught in the middle of something that should have been handled between us. I'm sorry you're in this position." Mark nodded, clearly relieved to escape the tension. "I'll figure something else out. Thanks for being honest with me," he said quietly before grabbing his bag and the leash for Rusty, who had been pacing in the yard. Ethan remained silent as Mark left, and Clara was left standing in the doorway, watching him go. The air in the house felt heavier now, laden with unsaid things. Clara turned back to Ethan, who was still standing in the entryway, his face pale and drawn. "What now?" he muttered, almost to himself. Clara didn't answer immediately. She walked past him, into the living room, and sat on the couch. She wasn't done. Not yet. "You can start by respecting me," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "You've ignored me for too long, Ethan. This isn't just about Mark moving in. It's about how you treat me, like my opinion doesn't matter." Ethan ran a hand through his hair, looking anywhere but at her. "I didn't think it was such a big deal," he admitted, his voice tight. "I just thought you'd understand, that you'd get it." Clara shook her head. "You don't get it, Ethan. You've been making decisions for both of us for years, and I've let it slide. But I'm done." She paused, watching him as he absorbed her words. "If you want to fix this, then you need to start seeing me as an equal. No more decisions without me. No more dismissing me like I don't matter. If you can't do that, I'm done." Ethan's shoulders sagged. For the first time in a long time, Clara saw him as vulnerable, truly vulnerable. He didn't argue. He didn't try to deflect. He simply nodded. "I get it," he said quietly. "I didn't realize how much I've hurt you. I was selfish." Clara felt a flicker of hope, but she didn't allow herself to believe it too quickly. She had heard apologies before. Real change was something that had to be shown, not just promised. As the evenings stretched on, the house felt different. The air between them wasn't heavy with tension, but it wasn't light either. Clara knew that things weren't fixed overnight. But for the first time in years, she felt like she might finally be getting through to Ethan. And that, in itself, was a victory. The next morning, Clara woke to silence. No dog barking. No heavy footsteps echoing through the hall. Just the faint hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak of the house settling around her. She lay still for a moment, staring at the ceiling, listening to the emptiness. It was strange, peaceful, almost, but underneath, her stomach twisted with unease. Ethan hadn't come to bed the night before. She'd heard him pacing the living room until long after midnight, muttering to himself, sometimes slamming a cabinet door or the fridge shut. She'd stayed in their bedroom, curled beneath the blankets, refusing to get drawn into another late-night argument. When she finally walked into the kitchen, Ethan was there, slouched at the table with a mug of coffee. His eyes were bloodshot, his hair messy, his jaw clenched. He looked at her when she entered, but he didn't say a word. "Morning," Clara said, her voice even, cautious. He grunted, staring down at the mug. Clara made herself a cup of tea, moving quietly around the kitchen. She felt his eyes on her, even when he pretended not to look. The silence between them was thicker than any argument they'd had. Finally, Ethan spoke. "So, what? You want me to ask your permission for everything now?" Clara turned slowly, her mug in hand. "Not permission. Respect."
He scoffed.
"Same thing." She sat across from him, her hands wrapped around the warm porcelain.
No, Ethan.
It's not. Permission is asking because you have no authority. Respect is asking because you value my voice. Because you see me as your equal. He leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms. You're making this sound bigger than it is. It was just Mark. Clara shook her head, her eyes locked on his. It was never just Mark. It's the vacations you booked without asking. The job changes you made without telling me. The way you dismiss my ideas about this house, about our future. You don't see it, Ethan, but every time you do that, you make me smaller. And I can't live like that anymore. For a long moment, he said nothing. His jaw flexed, his eyes narrowed. Clara held her ground, refusing to look away. Finally, he muttered, "You could have just told me." Her laugh was short, bitter. "I've been telling you for years. You just never listened." The words landed hard. Ethan's face shifted, the defensiveness faltering for just a second before he masked it again. He stood abruptly, pacing the kitchen like a caged animal. "This is ridiculous," he said, his voice rising. "I bust my ass to give us a good life, and now suddenly I'm the bad guy because I try to help a friend." Clara stayed seated, calm in the storm of his anger. "You're not the bad guy for wanting to help him. You're the bad guy for deciding it without me. Do you understand the difference?" He froze mid-step, staring at her. Something flickered in his eyes, but it was gone too fast to name. When he spoke again, his voice was quieter. "So, what do you want me to do?" "Just change overnight." Clara sipped her tea before answering. "I want you to try. Really try. Not just say the right words to shut me up. I want you to ask. To listen. To care about what I think. If you can't do that, then we don't have a marriage. We're just two people living in the same house." The silence stretched between them again, heavy and raw. Later that week, Clara found herself walking with Sophie at the park, the crisp autumn air biting at their cheeks. Sophie listened intently as Clara poured everything out. The letter, the confrontation, Mark leaving, Ethan's resistance. "You finally stood up to him," Sophie said, her eyes bright with pride. "I'm so damn proud of you." Clara smiled faintly, though her chest still felt tight. "I don't know if it will change anything. He's stubborn. And part of me wonders if he even wants to change." Sophie stopped walking, turning to face her. "Clara, listen to me. Whether he changes or not, you've already changed. You're not that quiet woman who let him decide everything anymore. You've got a voice now. And once you've found it, you don't lose it." The words settled deep inside Clara, warming something that had been cold for a long time. That night, when Ethan came home late from work, Clara was waiting for him in the living room. She didn't shout. She didn't accuse. She simply asked, "Did you eat?" He looked surprised, almost thrown off balance. No, not yet." She nodded. "There's food in the kitchen if you want it." He hesitated, then walked past her into the kitchen. And though they didn't talk much that evening, there was something different in the air. Not forgiveness. Not healing. But a beginning. Clara knew it wasn't enough. Words and small gestures wouldn't erase years of being ignored. But she also knew one thing with absolute certainty. She would never go back to being silent. If Ethan wanted to stay married to her, he would have to learn to share the weight of their life, not carry it alone, or worse, force her to carry his choices without her consent. For the first time in a long while, Clara felt steady in her own skin. 2 weeks passed. The house was quieter now, stripped of the chaos that had come with Mark and his restless dog. But silence didn't mean peace. Clara and Ethan moved around each other carefully, like dancers learning unfamiliar steps. There were no shouting matches, but there was no easy laughter either. Just space. Space filled with tension, with unspoken questions, with the ache of everything that had gone wrong. Clara had expected Ethan to push back harder. Instead, he was strangely subdued, thoughtful in a way that unsettled her. He lingered at the table after meals, staring at nothing. He asked questions he'd never asked before, about her work, about her friends, about her day. His voice was hesitant, uncertain, as though he were trying on a new role and wasn't sure it fit. At first, Clara didn't trust it. She answered politely but distantly, watching, waiting to see if it would last. She had learned the hard way that apologies and promises could be hollow. But as the days stretched on, Ethan didn't slip back into his old ways. If anything, he seemed lost. And maybe, just maybe, willing to listen. One evening, he came home with takeout, her favorite, from the little Thai place across town she loved, but he always dismissed as too spicy. Clara raised her eyebrows when he set the bags down on the counter. "You hate Thai food," she said. "I don't hate it," he muttered, avoiding her gaze. "I just never gave it a chance." She studied him, trying to gauge whether this was another performance. But when he finally looked at her, there was no smugness in his eyes, just a tired sort of honesty. So they sat down together, eating quietly, the sharp flavors filling the silence between them. Halfway through the meal, Ethan set his fork down and rubbed his hands over his face. "I've been thinking," he said finally, his voice low, "about what you said, about respect." Clara waited, her fork poised in midair. "I don't know how to fix everything I've done wrong," he admitted, his shoulders slumping. "But I don't want to lose you. And I don't want you to feel small because of me. I don't know how to change overnight, but I want to try." Clara's throat tightened. She didn't respond immediately, afraid that hope would blind her to reality. She needed more than words. "You've said things like that before," she said carefully. "What makes this time different?" He met her eyes and for once didn't look away. "Because this time, I finally heard you." Something in his tone, the rawness, the vulnerability, broke through her defenses. She set her fork down, leaning back in her chair. "Then start small," she said softly. "Ask me before you make decisions. Not because I need control, but because I deserve to be included. Because this is our life, not just yours." He nodded, the weight of her words sinking in. "I can do that." The weeks that followed weren't perfect. Ethan slipped up more than once, making choices out of habit, without consulting her. But each time, Clara called him out, calm and firm, and each time he apologized without defensiveness. Slowly, the pattern began to change. Clara, too, felt herself shifting. She no longer bit her tongue when something bothered her. She no longer shrank back to keep the peace. With Sophie's encouragement, she began sketching again, filling her studio with bursts of color and unfinished canvases. For the first time in years, she was reclaiming the parts of herself she had set aside for the sake of being agreeable. One Saturday afternoon, Clara was in the garden, dirt beneath her fingernails, the sun warming her shoulders, when Ethan came out with 2 mugs of coffee. He handed one to her without a word and sat beside her on the step. They watched the breeze ripple through the trees for a long while before Ethan spoke. "I talked to Mark yesterday." Clara glanced at him, surprised. "Oh, he's staying with his brother for now. He said to tell you he's sorry, that he didn't mean to get caught in the middle." Ethan paused, his expression thoughtful. "I told him he couldn't have stayed here, even if you'd agreed. It wasn't fair to you." Clara blinked, her chest tightening. It was the first time Ethan had openly acknowledged putting her first. "That means more to me than you know," she said quietly. He gave a small nod, sipping his coffee. "I'm still learning." Clara smiled faintly. "So am I." That night, lying in bed, Clara stared at the ceiling, her mind restless. She thought about everything they had been through, the hurt, the anger, the endless silence. But she also thought about the shifts, the small cracks of light breaking through. For the first time in years, she felt something like possibility.
Not certainty.
Not blind hope, but possibility. She turned onto her side, watching Ethan breathe in the dim light. He was far from perfect, but then so was she. What mattered was whether they could rebuild, not the same marriage they had before, but something new, something stronger. Clara reached out, resting her hand lightly on his arm. He stirred, half asleep, and turned toward her. His eyes fluttered open just enough to meet hers. "Everything okay?" he murmured. Clara hesitated, then nodded. "Yeah," she whispered. "For now." And for the first time in a long time, that was enough. And with that, Our story comes to an end, but the real story begins with your thoughts. What would you do if you were in this situation? Let me know in the comments.